All right, well, you ready?
You bet.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Ask the Expert at AirInKnows.com. We are here with Jeff Reinke with Manufacturing.net. He is the Editorial Director there. Jeff, how are you doing today?
Real good. How about
I'm
yourself?
doing good, man. Appreciate your
Good.
patience through our technical difficulties. Can you give our viewers just a little bit of background of you and your career, just real quick?
Sure. So basically, for the better part of the last 10 years, I've been working here at Advantage Business Media. We have a collection of 7 different manufacturing brands in a lot of different vertical segments, whether it be food, pharmaceuticals, industrial MRO, distribution. Manufacturing.net, like Ben mentioned, is our largest brand, probably most expansive one,
Uh-huh.
furthest reaching. And my job is basically to make sure all the words are doing all the right things for our readers. So.
Well, good. Well, we again appreciate your time. Some of the hot buttons that we want to focus on today will be reshoring, overall education direction, the economy, and then we'd like to touch on 3D printing at the end of the interview. So, if you're ready, we'll go ahead and just dive right into it. Lately we've seen a lot on Twitter and just in the media about reshoring movement, and seeing that gain a lot of steam. Can you just kind of real quick touch on reshoring and exactly what that means? And then, do you think that that's sustainable or more of a short-term blip?
Well, reshoring, obviously, we're talking about jobs that were someplace else. Most prominently, we're looking at China or someplace in Asia, basically being brought over to the U.S. for a number of reasons, either to be closer to the customer base that's buying the product, or in a lot of cases, just because there's a lower cost availability now. When you look at the increase in logistics and shipping costs that it takes to send something from Asia or a different part of the world, labor rates have also gone up in some of those areas. So it actually becomes more cost effective for a lot of manufacturers to come back to the U.S. and actually produce closer to where it's being bought.
Right.
I think it's a great thing. There's a lot of people who like to sort of downplay the impact that the reshoring's been having because they compare it to all the jobs that were lost at one point in time that went over to Asia, to China, wherever. And the reality is anything that's coming back, in my opinion, is a dramatic positive
Sure.
thing.
I agree.
Now, these aren't huge quantities. This isn't a huge percentage, but it's still positive, and it's positive for a number of reasons. The obvious one being it's U.S. jobs. It's
Right.
jobs coming back to the U.S. manufacturing sector. I think what's even stronger or a greater element of it is the fact that it's getting more notoriety. So when these things are published in the paper, when they're run on the news, it's a positive element of manufacturing that's being discussed. It makes other U.S. manufacturers feel a sense of pride in still producing stuff here, and it also makes them think a little bit. Hey, should I be looking different parts of the U.S. to start manufacturing my products? Am I still really getting a lot of those competitive advantages from manufacturing in different parts of the country? So I think if you're looking at it for a long-term strategy, something that's going to have a dramatic impact in terms of manufacturing growth and jobs, not really. It's a smaller piece, but as a part of a bigger puzzle, I think it's just a lot of positives that we can really look forward to and be proud of.
Well, and just to kind of build on that a little bit, and I tend to agree with you, and when people think of jobs coming in, not quite at the rate as what they went out, and so then there's kind of a natural expectation for it to just boom and for it to just kind of blow up. But I think what you're saying is even if you could just curtail the decline and then even just flatten out there, that's still an overall incremental growth, right?
Absolutely. And I think what people forget sometimes, too, is that U.S. manufacturing has always been a huge part of this country's GDP.
Yeah.
I mean, when you look at manufacturing, even before 2010, comparatively, it would rank, if you look just at what manufacturing produces in gross domestic product, it still would rank as in the top 15 economies in the world.
Right.
So it's a huge economy. You're not going to make a huge splash, but like you said, it's a lot of positives that we can take from some of those reshoring initiatives.
No, I agree, and it's just great to see because I think for the first time and since I can remember to actually see these jobs coming back is great. So, kind of building on that, can you kind of talk about the labor force in general? I mean, my perception would be that with all the jobs kind of going overseas, I would have had to imagine that generated some kind of skills gap there between the jobs leaving and the jobs coming back. Can you kind of touch on just the jobs in general and the skills gap? Do you see a skills gap? And then what would be a way to kind of curtail some of that?
Well, I don't think there's any question there's a skills gap right now. And I think a lot of it just has to do with the perception of manufacturing, and I think that's slowly changing, which is definitely a positive thing.
Right.
And the more we can talk about all the technology that's at play within the manufacturing setting, it's going to lure more of those folks who are maybe looking at a different type of career into pursuing manufacturing and looking at their local tech school, because manufacturing isn't coming out of a plant covered in grime and oil. It's about working with robots. It's about the connectivity. It's about working with a lot of mobile devices and wireless technologies. It's a different dynamic. So there's definitely a skills gap there when it comes to managing a lot of the automation and a lot of the other things that are going on within these really high-tech production facilities. So there's a gap there, but I think the worm is slowly turning. I think there is a positive movement in terms of the way people are perceiving it and the way that we're able to get, hopefully, more of the younger generation into these positions.
Well, I think it's a credit to what you guys are doing and what we're trying to do as far as spreading the word. Because, and I think you said it really well. It's a great industry, and it's got a lot of great people and a lot of. You're right. You do kind of have the perception of manufacturing coming out and not having worked with high tech stuff or maybe being a little less skilled. So I think that's a great way to say it. And I think you're right too. As that worm turns. Maybe you can start to close that, and that's leads right into our next question. What I see the cost of education, of college education specifically, for even when I graduated about 15 years ago, to see that cost continue to just rise exponentially. Do you see a uptick in the demand for trade? And a trade school is probably a bad way to say it because I know it has a negative connotation, but for these skilled schools that are out there, do you see an uptick in that here in the next 10 to 15 years, or maybe even should say 5 to 10, to kind of offset that skills gap?
I think that the tech schools have always been there, right? They've always been the ones saying, hey, we're here, what do you need? And the tech schools, I think, have done an excellent job of adapting to the students that they've had and the individuals that are coming in and the types of career paths that they're pursuing. So I think the tech schools, I don't think they're going to be inundated or should I say overtasked with individuals coming in. I think they're more than ready. I think they always have been, because you're looking at institutions that have always been very customer friendly. They've always been looking to adapt and adjust as necessary and as needed, based on what the economy was providing, what kind of jobs were out there. So it's, like I said, I think it's an exciting time, and I think we're very thankful that in the last couple of political elections, they've been talking about manufacturing, and they've been talking about the opportunities in manufacturing. It's raised the notoriety of the industry, and as a result, I think even in high schools, you've got guidance counselors and other folks talking about manufacturing, not only as an option, but as a great one at that, with all the technology that's involved. People like Dean Kamen, the STEM program, a lot of those things are just bringing to light a lot of great things involved with industrial and design engineering.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And if you can continue to change that perception, I think you could close that a little bit better. But so you're not really seeing, like you said, in your opinion, the trade schools have done a good enough job in the past to kind of maintain that infrastructure to handle even somewhat of an uptick of applicants.
Well, I think so. And I think even what you're seeing is some more of the traditional four-year institutions. They're putting in place manufacturing and operations type programs for four-year degrees.
Right.
Here in Wisconsin, we have the UW system. We've got satellite schools all over the state, and there's a couple of them that really specialize in that. Putting together four-year degrees, talking about specifically, here's when you're in a plant, you're setting you up to be that plant manager, basically. So
well, and that's really true. And I think if when I was kind of our age guys, when there is a perception there, especially the machinists and things like that, I've been amazed as we work with the pros company rebuilding compressors. We have a lot of manual mills and manual lathes and manual machinists in general. I mean, watching these guys work and the level of precision in which they get these products is just unbelievable. And I wish people could understand that a little bit more, the amount of intelligence, the amount of math, and the amount of skill that it really does take to machine these products.
Well, I agree with you 100%. A lot of folks get real excited. Yeah, I want to be a code programmer and stuff like that. We can write lots of code for websites and other things.
Yeah.
Don't have the impact. Write some code for a CNC machine.
Yeah.
See what you can really produce and really create. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I think that it'll come. Like you said, as the jobs are here, it'll come. So, as we kind of talk about kind of building back on the reshoring and even from an educational standpoint, is there a certain geographic shift or anything like that you're seeing for some of our viewers that may want to be getting to a specific location or something like that? Do you see it in the census data or anything like that? Do you see any of these jobs being created in a certain geographic area of the country?
I think it's interesting, and good or bad, I think it's driven a lot by politics and what the local political environment or attitudes are. And really, it really starts with the southeastern part of the country. When you look at areas like South Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, and now even look at the work that Governor Perry is doing in your home state of Texas in getting more manufacturers down there with different types of incentives, making it really, really attractive to these manufacturers, these larger manufacturers, to come to these geographies, to build new facilities in these geographies. Look at Boeing. Always, forever, where they were attached to the state of Washington, they looked at a lot of different places. So there's a lot of different opportunities out there. What I'm seeing is a lot more going to the southeastern part of the country. What's a little bit scary, when we look at geography, not so much within the U.S., but for North America, Mexico is really becoming very, very attractive to a lot of people for obvious reasons. You look at the reshoring initiative, it's get closer to the U.S. market. It's such a big market, so many consumers, so many spenders, that they can manufacture down in Mexico, keep their labor rates relatively lower, somewhat lower than it would be in the U.S., and logistically, they're still right there. There's roads, logistics, they can load up the trucks and be close to their distribution centers here in the U.S. So definitely the southeastern part of the country is doing a lot of great things and attracting manufacturers. South Carolina specifically is a huge hotbed. When you look at the things that BMW has done down there, keeping BMW happy and attracting all those other automotive suppliers. But I think the biggest competition for people in my neck of the woods, like Wisconsin and Minnesota and Michigan, that have a very strong manufacturing base historically, you're competing with Mexico on a lot of fronts right now.
That's interesting. I hadn't seen much of that. That's an interesting point, especially like you said, geographically, and be able to get it into the States. That makes a lot of sense.
The biggest issue right now is still the labor force, still it's still very attractive with the U.S., but as the Mexican workforce gets better trained and gets better suited, and some of the infrastructure potential challenges get solved, they could be a real thorn in the side of U.S. manufacturing going forward.
It makes a lot of sense. Well, you kind of touched on it earlier, and I'd like to kind of build on this as far as manufacturing having a perception of being somewhat boring. Not to put words in your mouth, but and that's true. I mean, I think that is. But I think one thing that, besides what you just mentioned in CNC and all the high-tech manufacturing that actually goes on, one of the things we hear a lot about is 3D printing. And I'll kind of ask this question in somewhat of a different kind of way, because I'm curious to see 3D printing seems to be kind of the new thing. And to me, and I could be wrong, it seems like it could be as revolutionary as something, say, the internet. So to kind of compare the two, what stage of 3D printing do you see as kind of compared to the internet? I mean, are we kind of at the dial-up phase? Are we even to a part where you can even get excited about it yet? Can you just kind of help our viewers understand where we might be in a concept, in a context that they may understand?
Sure, well, definitely something to be excited about. It's an amazing technology. What's unique is, I think if you compare it to the internet, on the internet, the way things sort of evolved and sort of were developed is, okay, we want to do something. We want to be able to connect faster than email with more people. So we developed social media platforms.
Right.
The need was there, and then the technology evolved. With 3D printing, what we're really seeing is the technology is there. Now we're figuring out the best way to use it. Okay. What is the right application?
Good point.
Because it's really impressive in terms of what you can do with these 3D printers, but we don't know the exact fits for it. And unfortunately, in a lot of cases, it's a little bit of trial and error. Okay. It's really figuring out, if I print these parts with these types of materials, is this going to work? Right. There's a lot of different materials that are working out there. There's still a lot of experimentation with metal. Metal is 3D printable at this point, but not in every application. I mean, metal is not a generic term. There's a lot of different variations and a lot of different tolerances that it needs to comply with, and from a specification and application perspective. So we're really still figuring out all of the true capabilities of 3D printing. And I think as a manufacturer, when you look at and investigate and think about potentially investing in this technology, you have to. It's sort of awkward, but you almost have to go at your own pace. It's whatever makes sense to you. The biggest advantages for it right now, from a purely manufacturing perspective, is really just in prototyping. It gets you that prototype out there and helps in product development significantly, because you can get a working prototype. You can see how all those different components are coming out, the specs, the sizes, the measurements, and really see if it's going to make sense. So prototyping is the biggest opportunity right now. But rapid manufacturing, small quantity manufacturing, when you look at stuff like the medical industry, if you can get a lot of that stuff through the FDA and figure out a way to get it spec'd in with low quantity runs, 3D printing is dynamite technology. So we're still figuring it out, I think, though.
That's a good point. And I'm in the industry, and I still know very little about it. So I think it's, or at least as far as the applications go. So I think as we do, that's a great way to say that, as we become more educated with it, to build on that. I mean, what do you see as, the greatest possibility with 3D printing? It's just such an exciting new technology.
I think I look two different ways, and they're really two dramatically different environments. And if we're looking ahead at the potential, the first one I think is the most interesting is medical. When you look at the different types of customizable medical devices that medical manufacturers have to produce, they're usually in lower quantities. Excuse me. So being able to 3D print those, or even potentially have a 3D manufacturing center within a healthcare facility. So in other words, you measure the customer up, or excuse me, the patient up. You understand exactly what they need, whether it's something that needs to be implanted, whether it's a certain type of instrument, whatever is needed. That could be a dynamic opportunity looking forward. But again, you're looking at the FDA and a lot of different elements that be involved with those materials. So that's a little bit maybe pie in the sky or science fiction thinking, but I think that's out there.
Right.
I think the other opportunity is in high reliability environments. You're looking on oil rigs, things like that. When something breaks, you need it fixed immediately. You need something on the spot, and you need it there quicker than is possible.
Right.
And being able to 3D print it out right on site, slap it in place. Food manufacturing is another one. Low margins in food manufacturing. If you get downtime from equipment, that is costing that facility a lot of money. Being able to print out that new gear, that new caster, whatever it is to fix and keep the conveyor rolling, for example, be a huge benefit. So,
help me understand low quantities. Are you talking about 1 and 2, or are you talking about 100? Are you talking about kind of
a lot? From my not this isn't across the board, but there's a fair number of medical contract manufacturers out there. They're making parts in the hundreds, and if they can find a lower cost way to do that, or potentially do it from an on-demand perspective, keep their inventories low, 3D printing is potentially an answer.
Right. Well, we're right here in the oil field, and so when you say and this is, again, maybe my ignorance, but, say build it on site and things like that, or just print it out on site. Are you thinking that the 3D printing capabilities may be portable enough to where you could have something on location to just print you out a part?
Well, I mean, when they first came out, a lot of it's looking forward, and that's kind of where I was coming from. But, they're about the size of a copy machine. Okay, so they're not huge. Depending on all of this, I'm painting with some broad strokes here. It depends on the complexity of the part and what kind of tolerances it needs to meet. But as we look forward, I think having one of these, because it doesn't consume a room or anything, we're talking about square feet that it takes up, and can potentially solve that problem quicker than a distributor can get you something.
Man, that's great. Well, I think it's very informative. I think this is a great industry, and I think as we can help on the PR side of things, which I think is really important, educating people. There is a skills gap. There is opportunities here in the U.S. to get into an industry that maybe not as sexy as some, but at the same time, steady, good margin, and a good place to be in a steady growth area.
Well, absolutely. One of the things that I was working on before we got on here is something we're doing addressing the Internet of Things. That's typically a term that would be addressed to mobile devices and electronics and things like that. Huge, huge issue in manufacturing, because you've got all these mobile devices, all these wireless connection points. So a lot of technology going on in manufacturing. I just saw a report from PwC, 72% of all research and development spending is being done in the manufacturing sector.
Wow.
A lot of money coming in and a lot of innovation involved.
That's a good stat. And I think the other side of it too, like what you said with the 3D printing, the old way of doing things is not necessarily going away tomorrow, if ever. But if you can somehow balance these two out, the labor force, and then with some of this new technology, the industry, the sky's the limit.
Absolutely.
Well, Jeff, can't thank you enough for being on. Again, Jeff Reinke with manufacturing.net. Y'all's Twitter handle is MNetNews. Am I right? At MNetNews?
Yep, that's that one. My personal Twitter handle, if you want to follow some of the things I'm putting out, is at Jeff Reinke, ABM. So.
All right, and we will make sure and get that out there. And again, it's aaronknows.com, and we really appreciate your time. And be sure and let us know if there's other guests you'd like to see us have, or different questions you'd like us to ask if you want to get Jeff back on. So thank you very much for your time, Jeff.
Thank you. Appreciate it.